On the sunlit streets of Savannah, Georgia, where Spanish moss swayed lazily from oaks and the scent of magnolia drifted into windows, Claire and Gregory's life seemed stitched from quiet perfection. Newly married, they had settled into a small, clapboard house just off the city's quieter avenues, where porches creaked familiarly under the weight of morning dew and the occasional hummingbird. Gregory, 32, worked in architectural design, his mind often occupied with blueprints and deadlines. Claire, 29, had recently taken a part-time position at a local art gallery, her days colored with paintings, sculptures, and the gentle rhythm of visitors' murmurs. From the outside, nothing appeared amiss. Neighbors waved as Gregory mowed the lawn in shorts and a sun-stained t-shirt. Claire carried bouquets of grocery store flowers into the house, laughing when Noah, Gregory's 12-year-old nephew, chased a stray dog down the driveway. Everything seemed ordinary, and ordinary suited them, until Nathan entered the picture. Nathan was Gregory's younger brother, 24, visiting from New Orleans for the summer before he began law school. He had the easy charm of someone who never quite needed to explain himself, a slight lilt to his southern accent, and the kind of smile that made ordinary conversation feel charged. The first time Claire met him, she had smiled politely, noting the resemblance to Gregory but with sharper cheekbones and the carefree energy of youth. She liked him immediately, family liked him immediately, but what she didn't know, and would soon discover, was how her own body remembered attraction in ways her mind refused to register consciously. The spark began innocuously enough. Nathan helped unpack boxes of groceries one Saturday morning, carrying a crate of fresh peaches that left sticky fingerprints on his fingers. Claire had offered a napkin. He'd laughed, brushing it off. There was something about the lightness in his movements, the casual brush of fingers against hers, that made her heart stumble for reasons she didn't want to name. She told herself it was absurd. He was her husband's brother. Nothing more. Days passed, and each encounter deepened the small, imperceptible tension. Nathan lingered at breakfast, teasing Gregory about his tendency to overdo the caffeine, laughing with Claire when Gregory scowled. Claire felt herself drawn into these exchanges more than politeness required. A shared joke, a fleeting touch on the arm. It was electric, though she chastised herself for feeling it. She was married, happy, committed. Her conscience had no place for this fluttering, insistent sensation. Evenings in the house began to change. Gregory would retreat to his drafting table, absorbed in a new project, while Claire tidied the kitchen. Nathan, leaning casually against the counter with a cold drink, would talk about New Orleans, about friends she'd never met, stories laced with charm and humor. Claire found herself laughing too loudly, a little too often, noticing the way his hand lingered near hers when he reached for a utensil. It was one of those evenings, late June, that the spark truly ignited. Claire was arranging fresh flowers in a vase, her fingers wet with water and floral stems. Nathan leaned over to adjust a stubborn bloom, their hands brushing. She pulled back reflexively, flushing, telling herself it meant nothing. Nathan looked at her with an expression she could not quite decipher, a mixture of mischief and anticipation. He withdrew, but the air between them felt charged. For Claire, the tension was a paradox. She loved Gregory, she would never betray him. Yet she couldn't deny the thrill she felt when Nathan laughed at a joke she hadn't expected, the pull of proximity, the intensity of someone noticing her in ways her husband had not yet noticed in months of shared routine. She began avoiding extended time alone with Nathan, but fate seemed indifferent. He lingered in doorways, leaned casually over railings when they walked on the porch, hovered at the edge of conversation, all with that effortless charm that made restraint feel increasingly impossible. The mornings that followed, she noticed herself adjusting her routines, deliberately staying in rooms longer when he entered, or finding excuses to speak when Gregory was occupied. Guilt followed every small infraction, an extra smile, a lingering gaze, but so did exhilaration. The juxtaposition of love and desire became a quiet obsession. Nathan, for his part, was careful, though his eyes betrayed interest before words did. He asked about her gallery work, complimented her taste in art, lingered near her desk with questions about upcoming exhibitions. In small, mundane ways, he invaded the space between Claire and her daily life, testing boundaries that neither wanted to acknowledge aloud. Then came the night when the boundary wavered. The three of them attended a gallery opening. Gregory engaged in discussions about building renovations, Nathan trailing behind, and Claire caught between them. Afterward, they lingered outside the gallery, the air thick with humidity and late-night city sounds. Nathan offered to help Claire with her coat. Their hands touched briefly. She felt the familiar, sharp thrill. She pulled back and laughed nervously, muttering a light excuse, but the spark had ignited beyond reason. For weeks, the pattern repeated. Innocuous touches, shared smiles, a joke only the two of them found funny. Each encounter left her both exhilarated and mortified. She carried the awareness of what she felt like a small, illicit flame inside her chest, quick to ignite, slow to extinguish. Claire knew it was dangerous. She knew the line they walked was razor thin, yet the heart is rarely obedient to reason. She caught herself stealing glances, finding excuses to linger in his presence, noting the slight tremor in her own pulse that came with a smile from Nathan. Gregory remained unaware, busy with work and the mundanity of domestic life, trusting in the seeming stability of marriage, blind to the quiet, building storm. Claire's internal conflict was subtle but relentless, a war waged in stolen moments, half-thoughts, and fleeting touches. She was aware, at some rational level, that one misstep could shatter everything. Yet she could not stop herself from noticing, from feeling, from craving the intensity of someone who saw her in ways her husband did not yet perceive. It was a spark, small and nearly imperceptible, but it held a promise of fire. Claire, married, committed, faithful, already knew the danger. And already, she could not look away. The summer stretched long and humid over Savannah, the air sticky with the scent of jasmine and distant magnolia. Claire found herself noticing Nathan more than she should, and each encounter left her heart both racing and trembling with guilt. Their exchanges, initially light and playful, began to carry a tension she could no longer rationalize away. It started with small confessions. One late afternoon, Gregory had left for a client meeting, and Nathan lingered in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of iced tea. Claire wiped her hands on a towel, heart-hammering as Nathan's gaze lingered a moment too long. "You're really good with colors," he said, nodding toward the still life she had arranged earlier. His voice was soft, casual, but the undertone, something unspoken, made Claire's breath hitch. "Thanks," she replied, smoothing the cloth over the counter, suddenly aware of every movement of her body. She tried to keep her voice steady, measured, neutral. But when Nathan stepped closer to adjust a vase, their hands brushed. Electric. A small shock, unbidden, but unmistakable. "I've never noticed. You pay attention to details like this," he murmured, and there it was again. The pull, the weight, the allure of someone noticing parts of you you didn't even know you revealed. Claire nodded, pretending to adjust the flowers, pretending that the flush rising in her cheeks was simply from the heat of the summer. Days became a careful dance. Nathan lingered near her when Gregory left for work, offering to help with errands, walking with her to the market, discussing mundane details that seemed ordinary only until one realized the tension in the spaces between words. They knew each other's rhythms now, the slight brush of hair from her shoulder, the way her lips parted when she laughed at an unremarkable joke, the quickened heartbeat she tried to disguise. It was inevitable that a line would be crossed. One humid afternoon, Claire had been sorting through her gallery invoices when Nathan appeared at the doorway, holding a package she had forgotten to retrieve from the front porch. He leaned casually against the frame, and the air between them thickened with unspoken recognition. "Here," he said, extending the package. Their fingers touched again, longer this time, deliberate, almost as if testing boundaries. Claire felt her pulse surge, her mind betraying her with desires she had long suppressed. She pulled her hand back, embarrassed, but Nathan's eyes, deep, knowing, mischievous, did not look away. Thanks," she stammered. The words sounded weak even to her own ears. Nathan smiled faintly, understanding the meaning of her hesitation without her having to say it. Weeks passed, and the temptation grew insistent. Claire found herself looking forward to Nathan's presence, relishing his subtle flirtations, the way he made her feel seen in a manner she hadn't expected. She caught herself imagining what it would be like to reach out, to let herself fall just a little, to taste the thrill forbidden yet irresistible. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind where the humid air clung to skin and the streets were deserted except for cicadas and the distant honk of a car. Gregory had gone to a late meeting, and Nathan stayed behind to help with the dishes. Their hands met over a plate, lingering, and neither pulled away. The silence was taut, filled with the promise of something they both knew was wrong yet could not resist. "Claire," Nathan's voice was low, almost a whisper, trembling with his own restraint. She looked up at him, eyes wide, heart hammering. "I know," she breathed. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The confession was mutual, unspoken, urgent. And then, inevitably, the kiss came. Soft, tentative at first, testing the boundary they both knew existed. But soon it deepened, fueled by the intensity of forbidden desire, a spark igniting a fire they had both tried to ignore. Claire felt herself unraveling, torn between love for her husband and the overpowering pull of Nathan's touch. The following days were a paradox. She hated herself for what she had done yet could not stop thinking of him. Every text, every glance, every accidental touch became charged with meaning. She walked through the house seeing Gregory in the soft light of morning, wanting to tell him everything and yet terrified of losing what they had built together. She wanted Nathan, but she also wanted the stability of her marriage, and the clash of desires tore her apart in silence. Nathan, too, wrestled with guilt. He loved his sister-in-law, yes, in ways that felt both exhilarating and unbearable. He hated the secrecy, the lies, the stolen moments. Yet he couldn't help himself. The attraction was magnetic, irresistible. Each encounter became a careful choreography, furtive touches, whispered confessions, stolen glances across rooms, until every day was a tightrope walk over a pit of moral chaos. Their affair, though hidden, transformed the house. Every corner, every hallway, every casual brush of arms carried weight. Claire found herself avoiding Gregory at times, inventing excuses to spend time with Nathan alone, but each encounter was bittersweet, marked by the fear of discovery. She replayed moments in her mind endlessly, each touch, each shared laugh, each heated glance a betrayal that made her pulse quicken. It wasn't long before the strain began to show. Gregory noticed subtle changes, Claire's distracted expressions, the way she seemed tense when Nathan was around, the way she laughed a little too brightly at his jokes. He dismissed them at first as fatigue or the stress of her part-time work. But even a careful observer could sense that something was shifting beneath the surface of their idyllic marriage. Claire, alone at night, wrestled with her conscience. She would lie awake, hearing the soft hum of the air conditioner, the distant chirping of cicadas, wondering how she could reconcile the love she felt for her husband with the intoxicating desire she could not resist for Nathan. She was living two lives in one body, two emotional worlds that could not coexist peacefully. And yet, the flame could not be extinguished. Each stolen kiss, each whispered word, each shared glance was a promise of intensity she had never felt before, a dangerous, intoxicating, impossible promise. The tension escalated, the temptation no longer theoretical but lived, embodied, unavoidable. It was only a matter of time before the careful balance, already precarious, would shatter. And when that happened, no one could predict the devastation it would bring. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that promised nothing more than the routine rhythms of breakfast, work, and errands. The sun slanted through the curtains, casting the living room in a calm, lazy light. Gregory, usually detached in his mornings, had lingered over coffee that day, feeling a rare sense of premonition he couldn't quite place. Claire was bustling around, humming softly as she packed lunchboxes for the kids and checked emails. Nathan was due to visit later to help with an overdue home project, an excuse that seemed benign, innocent. But that day, Gregory decided to take an unexpected break. He left his office early, a choice that would unravel everything. He arrived quietly, stepping into the hallway and noticing immediately that something was off. The air seemed heavier, charged with a tension that made his skin prickle. He heard voices, low and intimate, coming from the study. Not a conversation about bills or children, but something else, soft laughter, breathy, deliberate. Gregory paused, frozen. He pressed his ear to the door. Words spilled out, fragments that shattered his composure. I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, but I don't care. The suffocating clarity of betrayal hit him before he could even process what he was hearing. His chest tightened, and the mug of coffee he had carried clattered to the floor, breaking the spell. The sound made them both startle. Nathan's hand went to Claire's arm instinctively, but too late. The damage was done. Gregory's eyes were sharp, angry, and profoundly hurt. Claire turned, her expression collapsing into fear and shame. Nathan, realizing the gravity of the moment, stammered, searching for words that would never suffice. Gregory, Claire began, voice trembling, but he cut her off. Don't, just don't. His voice was a low, brittle edge of ice. I saw everything. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Gregory's hands curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. He could feel the betrayal in his veins, an aching that radiated from the pit of his stomach, through his chest, into his limbs. Everything he had trusted, every shared laugh, every intimate conversation, it felt like it had been a lie. Claire's tears fell freely now. I'm so sorry. I don't know how it happened. Nathan stepped forward, but Gregory's eyes were like daggers, stopping him. Stay where you are, he said, voice shaking but deadly calm. The words carried years of love, now twisted into pain. The confrontation was a collision of emotion. Claire tried to speak, to explain, to reach out, but every word felt weak, inadequate, a pale shadow against the depth of Gregory's betrayal. Nathan, too, realized that this was beyond apology, beyond explanation. The air itself seemed to carry judgment, the walls echoing with the invisible weight of shattered trust. Gregory's hands shook as he gestured to the door. Get out, both of you. I need space to breathe, to think. His voice broke, but he did not relent. Nathan obeyed, leaving with a quiet, shame-laden retreat, understanding that he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Once they were gone, Gregory sank into the sofa, hands covering his face. The house was suddenly too quiet, the absence of sound pressing against his eardrums. Every memory of Claire's smile, every touch now felt poisoned. He replayed moments in his head, each one now reframed as evidence of deception, and the realization crushed him. Claire, outside the door, leaned against the frame, sobbing uncontrollably. The weight of her guilt was immense, suffocating. She wanted to reach out, to explain, to plead, but Gregory had already barricaded himself in a fortress of grief. She was trapped by her own choices, the seductive pull of forbidden desire that had led to this inevitable reckoning. Over the following days, the household was fractured. Gregory moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding Claire, his presence distant yet omnipresent. Claire tried to resume normalcy, but each attempt was met with cold silence, sharp glances, and unspoken judgment. Nathan ceased visiting entirely, the affair now a wound exposed, raw and bleeding. Conversations became battles fought in whispers. Claire attempted to apologize, to make sense of the chaos she had caused. I never meant to hurt you, she said one evening, voice soft, eyes pleading. But Gregory, eyes hollow and rimmed with red, shook his head. Intentions don't erase betrayal, he replied. The words were simple, precise, and irreparable. The children, unaware of the full scope, noticed the tension. Emma asked if everything was okay, her voice cautious, sensing the invisible walls that had grown between her parents. Noah, ever sensitive, asked if Mommy and Daddy were still happy. Each question tore at Claire's heart, a reminder that her choices had consequences beyond herself. Gregory wrestled with conflicting emotions. Anger and hurt were intertwined with enduring love. He could not deny the bond he had built over years of shared life, yet the betrayal gnawed at him like a relentless tide. Each night, he sat alone, tracing the memories of his marriage, alternating between nostalgia and resentment, love and grief. Claire, too, was trapped in emotional limbo. She loved Gregory, always had, But the affair with Nathan had awakened a dangerous, consuming desire she could not erase from memory. Each attempt to resist only intensified the pull, leaving her torn between two lives, two emotional truths. The turning point came unexpectedly. Gregory, after a week of silence, invited Claire to the porch, where the evening air was thick with humidity and cicadas. He sat across from her, not speaking at first, simply letting the quiet settle between them. "I need to know," he said finally, voice measured, brittle but calm. Do you still love me?" Claire's throat tightened. She had been avoiding this question herself, afraid of her own answer. But the honesty in Gregory's eyes, pain, vulnerability, and hope intertwined, forced her to confront herself. "Yes," she whispered, I do. I never stopped loving you." The admission hung in the air, fragile yet potent. Gregory's jaw loosened, attention released, if only slightly. They both understood that love alone could not erase the betrayal, but it could be a foundation upon which to begin, tentatively, cautiously, painfully. Forgiveness, they realized, would take time. Rebuilding trust would be slow, punctuated by relapses of doubt, anger, and fear. But the acknowledgement of enduring love was the first thread, a single lifeline in a storm of hurt. Claire promised transparency, honesty, and the painful work of proving herself day by day. Gregory, for his part, committed to confronting his grief and resentment without allowing them to corrode the core of their marriage. In the weeks that followed, they navigated a delicate dance, shared meals without arguments, conversations about the future with cautious optimism, gestures of affection carefully measured yet genuine. Nathan remained a ghost in their lives, a lesson in temptation, regret, and the consequences of forbidden desire. The discovery, catastrophic as it was, became a crucible. The marriage, battered and scarred, endured because the love that remained was stubborn, resilient, and fiercely protective of the family they had built. And so, the household slowly regained a semblance of equilibrium. The children laughed again, tentative at first, sensing the fragile repair. Claire and Gregory learned to coexist, their love tempered by betrayal but not extinguished. The affair was a shadow, acknowledged, condemned, and finally relegated to memory, a painful reminder of human weakness, desire, and the painstaking work required to rebuild trust once shattered. Spring arrived slowly, its humidity rolling through the house like a tentative whisper, unsettling yet gentle. Gregory noticed the faint smell of jasmine from the neighbor's garden drifting through the open windows. It was as if the world itself was urging caution, patience, and quiet renewal. Within the house, the atmosphere was taut but not unmanageable. Tension had not vanished, but it had softened, no longer slicing through the air like a blade. Claire moved about the house with a careful awareness of Gregory's presence, conscious of every gesture, every glance, aware that any misstep could ignite old suspicions. She spoke less impulsively, measured her tone, and allowed silences to stretch rather than filling them with meaningless chatter. Each action was a test, a deliberate attempt to show consistency where before there had been recklessness. Gregory, in turn, had shifted. He no longer recoiled at every touch, nor did he scrutinize Claire with the hawk-like vigilance of the betrayed. Still, he remained wary, guarding himself against impulses to either forgive too quickly or lash out. He was learning the painful art of patience, confronting his anger, and wrestling with his lingering desire for retribution. But amid this cautious approach, there was something else, a deep, undeniable yearning for reconnection, for the intimacy that had once seemed effortless. The children noticed first, as children always do, attuned to the currents of emotion around them. Emma's eyes, sharp and discerning, registered the subtle shifts, the light brushing of hands across the counter, the careful exchange of words in the kitchen, the faint smiles that were no longer fleeting or forced. Noah, less analytical but no less perceptive, began to speak freely again, asking questions without fear of sparking tension. Their laughter, tentative at first, began to return to the corners of the house like shy, wandering ghosts reclaiming familiar spaces. Therapy became part of their routine, initially resisted by Claire, who found the sessions uncomfortable, exposing cracks she would rather have concealed. Gregory attended with equal reluctance, but together they slowly learned to articulate the unspoken, to examine not only the betrayal but its roots, its consequences, and its subtle effects on their bond. The counselor, patient and precise, guided them with questions that were both gentle and incisive, forcing them to confront truths they had avoided in the haze of grief and anger. "You cannot erase what has happened," the counselor said during one session. "You can, however, decide how it defines you, together or apart." Those words hung in the air, heavy and profound. Gregory understood that healing was not linear. It was cyclical, unpredictable, sometimes regressing before progress could be measured. Claire realized that desire, once diverted toward forbidden territory, could be rechanneled, not erased, into a renewed commitment to the life she had almost destroyed. Evenings became exercises in normalcy. They cooked together, Gregory chopping onions, Claire stirring sauce, each gesture deliberate yet devoid of past tension. The kitchen smelled of garlic and simmering tomato, ordinary aromas carrying extraordinary meaning. Meals were shared with care, small courtesies reinstated. Passing the pepper, asking first before taking the last piece of bread, listening without judgment. Each act, seemingly mundane, was a thread woven back into the tapestry of trust. Communication, once fractured, began to reconstruct itself. Gregory asked questions not to interrogate but to understand. "How are you feeling?" he would say, voice gentle, eyes soft. Claire responded with honesty, sometimes admitting guilt, sometimes expressing frustration, sometimes sharing moments of hope. They learned that words could rebuild where silence had corroded, that conversation was both balm and tool. The bedroom, a space once laden with fear, guilt, and longing for something lost, became a testing ground for intimacy. Touch was careful at first, tentative, as if feeling the shape of another body after years of absence. There were missteps, hesitations, withdrawals, but each attempt carried significance. The slow reclamation of physical closeness mirrored the emotional work they performed daily, reminding them that love was not simply a feeling but a sustained practice, a conscious choice made in every glance, every hand, every shared breath. Claire began to recognize her own growth. The affair had been a wake-up call, exposing vulnerabilities and desires she could no longer ignore. She confronted her own patterns of impulsivity, her longing for excitement outside the boundaries of commitment. Through introspection, she realized that true fulfillment could not be stolen from another. It had to be nurtured within the life she had vowed to build. Gregory, for his part, wrestled with his own fragility. He confronted not only the betrayal but the parts of himself that had allowed complacency to creep into their marriage, the unchecked irritations, the dismissals, the small failures of attention that had widened the gap between them. In doing so, he discovered resilience, patience, and the profound capacity to forgive, not to forget, but to embrace a more expansive understanding of love. One afternoon, sunlight streaming through the blinds, Claire found a letter Gregory had left on the kitchen counter. It was simple, almost childlike in its careful penmanship. "I am hurt. I am angry, but I am also here. I choose us, always." The words struck her like a bolt of clarity, a reminder that love was not passive. It required effort, vulnerability, and, above all, presence. She felt the weight of her guilt, but also a swell of gratitude, an acknowledgement that their shared history, for all its fractures, had not ended. Small rituals took on new meaning. Coffee in the morning, a shared glance at the newspaper, a hand squeezed across the table. Even mundane conversations, about groceries, children's schedules, weekend plans, became exercises in connection, reminders that ordinary life could hold extraordinary significance when lived consciously together. The children continued to be touchstones, their presence a living measure of the work underway. Emma, now more willing to confide, asked questions about forgiveness and love, her insights surprisingly profound for a teenager. Noah, whose laughter had returned in fits and starts, sought reassurance that family could endure pain without dissolving. Through these interactions, Claire and Gregory saw the stakes of their efforts. Love, once broken, had the capacity to heal, not in isolation, but through the shared commitment to restoration. Summer arrived, heavy and oppressive in the south, the air thick with warmth and humidity. Yet the house felt lighter, buoyed by the quiet victories of reconciliation. The garden bloomed, tended not only by routine but with renewed attention, flowers a living metaphor for the painstaking care required in human relationships. Gregory and Claire found themselves walking through the yard together in the early evenings, sharing stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. They had learned to tolerate, then cherish, the discomfort of vulnerability. They discovered that love was not a static possession but a dynamic process, a negotiation between desire and duty, longing and loyalty. The affair, once a chasm between them, had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the tenacity required to rebuild it. In time, they returned to milestones that once defined their relationship: anniversaries, family dinners, shared laughter with friends. Each celebration was tinged with awareness, a conscious recognition of survival and growth. They discovered pleasure in their commitment not as an obligation but as an active, mutual engagement, each day a reaffirmation of choice, desire, and dedication. Eventually, Claire felt ready to embrace life fully again, untethered from the shadows of past mistakes. Gregory, witnessing this transformation, felt a profound relief, a deepening of love that was tempered by experience and enriched by hardship. They realized that the pain endured had become the soil in which a new, more resilient love could take root. A love not naive, not untested, but profoundly human. One evening, as the sun set in golden slashes across the living room, Gregory took Claire's hand and said quietly, almost shyly, "We're still here. Together." Claire smiled, tears brimming. "Yes, we're still here." The children played in the background, their laughter a melody of continuity and hope. The house, once fractured and shadowed, now resonated with quiet joy. The past, acknowledged and addressed, was no longer a looming threat but a teacher. The healing was not complete, perhaps it never could be, but the family had learned that love was a choice renewed daily, a deliberate engagement with vulnerability, forgiveness, and presence. It was in the shared meals, the gentle conversations, the laughter that returned slowly, painfully, but undeniably. It was in the hands held across the table, the smiles exchanged without words, and the quiet understanding that survival did not mean perfection, only commitment. And so, with the warmth of summer lingering and the promise of new beginnings in the air, Claire and Gregory moved forward, imperfect, cautious, yet profoundly alive. The house was full once more, not just with children's laughter, but with the soft, steady pulse of love that had endured, learned, and finally, begun to heal. Autumn arrived with a hush, the southern sunlight softer, the air tinged with the faint scent of fallen leaves. Gregory and Claire moved through the days with a rhythm that was steady, deliberate, and at once fragile. The house itself seemed to breathe differently, walls no longer echoing with suspicion or silent resentments, but with a muted, measured joy that took time to settle. They were no longer merely cohabiting, they were co-healing. Claire had begun to speak of the future with a gentleness that was almost shy. Not in sweeping gestures or promises she could not keep, but in small acknowledgments, a suggestion for weekend plans, a remark about their shared finances, a comment on the children's school projects. Gregory responded with equal care, listening fully, speaking deliberately, and allowing his own desires to be tempered by the understanding of what they had survived. The children, Emma and Noah, adapted in ways that reflected the subtle transformations around them. Emma's sarcasm remained, a shield that had yet to fall entirely, but now it was punctuated with moments of genuine laughter, a lightness that had been absent for months. Noah's ease returned in full, his small questions and spontaneous remarks no longer tinged with the caution of a child walking through fractured territory. Together, the family experienced a rhythm that was neither perfect nor effortless, but profoundly alive. Claire and Gregory took small, quiet victories as signs of enduring progress. They attended school events together, their presence side by side no longer a source of discomfort or fear of judgment, but a deliberate choice to stand united, even in public. They shared meals without the undercurrent of tension that had once made even breakfast feel like a minefield. Handshakes became touches, glances became smiles, and eventually, tentative embraces became ordinary gestures of comfort and love. It was during one of these ordinary evenings that the news arrived. Claire discovered she was pregnant. At first, disbelief mixed with a fragile hope, and then an overwhelming sense of renewal. The pregnancy became a tangible emblem of second chances, of life pressing forward despite past mistakes. They navigated the early months cautiously, mindful of Claire's health and the emotional stakes, but each appointment, each tiny heartbeat, became a moment of shared wonder, a new reason to invest in one another fully. Gregory found himself marveling at the transformations within Claire. The tension that had once defined her movements, her speech, her gaze, softened into something radiant yet steady. She spoke openly of fears and hopes, her vulnerability no longer a liability but a bridge between them. He listened as she recounted her dreams for their child, her anxieties about parenthood, her reflections on the fragility of human desire. In doing so, he realized that love was not a static possession, it was the ongoing act of witnessing, responding, and choosing connection. The house, too, seemed to respond to this renewal. The garden, once neglected during the turmoil, bloomed with care. Gregory tended the roses, Claire nurtured the vegetables, and the children added their own touches, scattering marigolds along the walkway or arranging stones in patterns they found meaningful. Every act of cultivation mirrored the work they were doing within themselves, patience, attention, and the quiet persistence required to sustain life, love, and trust. There were moments when the past resurfaced, a glance misinterpreted, a memory triggered by a familiar smell, but these instances no longer held dominion over their daily existence. Gregory and Claire had learned to confront discomfort without letting it fracture their renewed bond. They spoke about the affair not with recrimination, but with recognition, understanding its roots and its consequences, acknowledging its impact without allowing it to define the entirety of their lives. One evening, as twilight filtered through the windows, Gregory found Claire in the living room, kneeling by the fireplace, a small notebook in her hands. She looked up, eyes glistening with unshed tears, and smiled. "I was just writing," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "About how far we've come." Gregory joined her, sitting cross-legged on the carpet. "We've come far," he said. "And yet it feels like we're only beginning." She nodded, closing the notebook. I think we've learned what it means to really choose each other. Not because it's easy, but because it matters." The children appeared then, bounding into the room with the careless energy of youth, and for a moment the family existed purely in the present, laughter, movement, and the unspoken understanding that survival had led to renewal. Gregory reached for Claire's hand instinctively, and she intertwined her fingers with his, a silent acknowledgement that they were partners in the truest sense, equal, committed, and present. Weeks turned into months, and with the passage of time, the pregnancy progressed. Claire experienced the subtle marvels and discomforts of impending motherhood, the fluttering of the child within, the shifting weight of anticipation, the quiet reflection that accompanies the realization that life is never truly within one's control. Gregory shared every step, attending appointments, reading aloud from parenting books, preparing the nursery with a care that bordered on reverence. One evening, late in the warm hush of early summer, Gregory and Claire found themselves alone in the nursery. The walls were painted a soft hue of sage, and sunlight filtered through sheer curtains. They stood side by side, gazing at the small crib that awaited a child yet unknown, and Gregory spoke with quiet intensity. "Do you think we can do it? Can we be the family we've always wanted to be?" Claire exhaled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I think we already are. It's just, we're learning to live it fully now." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and in that small, intimate gesture, all the lingering fears of the past seemed to dissolve. They had survived betrayal, suspicion, and emotional exile. They had learned patience, forgiveness, and the power of sustained choice. Now, they were ready to embrace life not as victims of circumstance, but as architects of a renewed bond. The birth, when it came, was both ordinary and miraculous. A quiet morning, the sun just cresting the horizon, and then the sudden, sharp cries of new life. Gregory held Claire's hand throughout, whispering words of encouragement, tears streaming down both their faces. When their child finally arrived, a daughter, healthy and alert, they stared at her with the kind of wonder that only comes from knowing the fragility and resilience of human connection. Emma and Noah were present, their excitement infectious. Emma's sarcasm softened into laughter and delight. Noah's small hands reached out to touch his new sibling with reverence. In that moment, the family existed in a perfect alignment of presence, hope, and unspoken promises. Later, as the house settled into the quiet of evening, Gregory cradled their daughter while Claire sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. The room smelled faintly of lavender and newborn powder, and the golden light from the nursery lamp bathed them in warmth. "We made it," Gregory whispered. "Yes," Claire replied, voice thick with emotion. "We really did." Outside, the world continued its rhythms, indifferent yet sustaining. Within the walls of the home, however, a profound truth resonated. Love, when tended with patience, honesty, and courage, could survive the most devastating trials. It could endure betrayal, rebuild trust, and bloom anew. They had learned that the heart's capacity for renewal was vast, resilient, and astonishing. And so, with their child nestled between them, the family embraced a future forged not in perfection, but in the deliberate, daily acts of care, understanding, and presence. The past, acknowledged and laid to rest, became a foundation rather than a weight. The affair, once a fracture that threatened to splinter everything, was now a cautionary tale, a memory that informed their choices without defining them. Claire looked up at Gregory, and for the first time in years, she felt a profound, unguarded certainty. "We're home," she whispered. Gregory smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Yes, we're finally home." And in that quiet, sacred space, the house was alive not just with the sounds of children and new life, but with the steady, unbreakable pulse of love renewed.